Boxing has the deepest history in all organized sports. The early days were chronicled through writing, and we're now able to witness historic fights from previous centuries through videos and more. We have long pondered who would win in a matchup between the greats of the past. In today's episode, we take a look at a matchup between the first black, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the Galveston giant Jack Johnson, and Australian heavyweight great, the Black Prince Peter Jackson. Jack Johnson had a total of 76 official bouts along with a number of exhibitions. Johnson had 54 wins, 34 by knockout, with a knockout ratio of 63%. He suffered 11 defeats, 6 of them by knockout. He had 8 draws. He also had 1 no contest and 18 no decision bouts. He stood at 6 feet 0 and a half inches with an aggregate weight of 203 pounds over his career. This included a 74-inch reach. Peter Jackson had a total of 78 official bouts. Jackson amassed 42 victories with 29 coming by way of knockout for a 69% KO ratio. He suffered 5 losses, 3 by knockout. Godfrey had a total of 13 draws, which was common during this time, 2 no contests, and 27 no decision bouts. He stood at 6 feet 1 and a half inches with an aggregate weight of 197 pounds over his career. His reach was 77 inches. Born in Galveston, Texas, Jack Johnson is one of the biggest names the sport has ever seen. He truly transformed the heavyweight division during his time with unprecedented defensive prowess. Johnson learned from an early defeat to Joe Koinski to take his time and focus on defense, having already been considered one of the great offensive heavyweights at that time. With this, Johnson was able to become arguably the greatest heavyweight the world has seen. His combination of size, skill, and strength proved to be overwhelming for many of the top heavyweights during his reigns as both colored and world heavyweight champion. Johnson mastered the art of tying up his opponents and fully nullifying their offense on the inside. He was also a master of pacing himself and only going for the knockout when he felt he'd fully worn opponents to the point of no return. Johnson also was a master of mind games and routinely played both to fighters and crowds during his fights. Ever the showman, Johnson would at times drag out fights in order to aggravate the viewing audience, all the while smiling through the fiasco. Johnson also ushered in a level of in and out of the ring flashiness still seen today. Johnson never met a camera he didn't like and a wide audience, a compliment to his personality and style. With this, Johnson knew when to fight with bad intentions were needed and scored some of the great visual stoppages we've seen from the time. Born in Christiansted, Danish West Indies before eventually migrating to Australia, Peter Jackson won the World Coloured Heavyweight Championship, as well as the Australian and British heavyweight title, and is arguably Australia's greatest heavyweight. Jackson was a solid, all-around boxer, with an intimidating physique, and truly one of the top competitors of his time. According to historians, Jackson was a graceful and scientific boxer, and usually outskilled his opponents, though he could have a mean streak and finished opponents when they were in trouble. Jackson trained under Larry Foley and sparred with the likes of Bob Fitzsimmons, Frank Slavin, and Jim Hall early in his career. Jackson quickly rose the ranks to being widely regarded as one of, if not the best boxers in Australia, and quickly started to make waves across the world. Jackson had an all-around combination of skill that made him a formidable and often ducked foe. Jackson also competed in a bare-knuckle matchup early in his career. Johnson held the world heavyweight title from 1908 to 1915. In 1908 he eagerly and easily defeated then heavyweight champion Tommy Burns in Australia to pick up the strap. Johnson has more notable opponents than we can list. He fought arguably the greatest fighter ever in multi-division great, the Boston Bone Crusher Sam Langford, the hard-hitting Joe Jeanette, light heavyweight great, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, Hard-hitting middleweight great, the Michigan assassin Stanley Ketchel. Multi-division UK great, Bob Fitzsimmons. Former undisputed heavyweight champion, the Boilermaker James J. Jeffries. Denver Ed Martin. And young Peter Jackson, who is aptly named after the other subject of this video. Peter Jackson fought all who would fight him, but was heavily avoided during his time. Notable opponents include the likes of the original George Godfrey, a great contender, and former colored heavyweight champion. Contender Patsy Cardiff, who also shared the ring with John L. Sullivan. Well-traveled contender, Denver Ed Smith. An epic 61-round contest with the former undisputed world heavyweight champion, Gentleman James J. Corbett. A loss to another former undisputed champion, the Boilermaker James J. Jeffries. A loss and draw to former Australian heavyweight champion, Bill Farnan early on in Jackson's career, and a fighter that helped to shape what he would become. And multiple wins over former Australian heavyweight champion, Tom Lees. Style and skill are even in this tough matchup. Both men were skilled in certain areas, especially defensively for Johnson. Jackson was all around a very gifted fighter with great size who could stylistically match up with any heavyweight. The edge on endurance goes to Jack Johnson. Jackson did fight in some longer, 15-plus round fights on multiple occasions, as did Johnson, but it was done at a higher level by Johnson, who had a greater array of competition in America. Chin is even, as both fighters had great beards and were knocked out once early in their careers while still green, and later in their careers when past their prime. The slight edge on power goes to Johnson. Johnson was in fact a very offensive fighter earlier in his career and gunned for the knockout, which he was successful at. Jackson packed power as well, but Johnson put his on display against better competition. Speed goes to Jackson with a slight edge, who was a finesse boxer who could use his speed, coupled with skill, to frustrate opponents. Resume undoubtedly goes to Johnson, whose opponents list reads like a who's who of boxing greats. Jackson was game for fights with anyone, but wasn't able to secure the big matchups in his prime, John L. Sullivan being one that many lobbied for. Both fighters traveled anywhere to fight, but Johnson was able to parlay his travels into an undisputed World Heavyweight Championship reign. Intangibles are even, but Johnson certainly could be awarded the edge in theory. Both fighters had an it factor about them in very different ways, and were able to be known across the world as great black heavyweights in a time where a shot at the championship was viewed as unreachable. Both fighters arose from poor upbringings in small towns to find success at the highest levels of the sport. All things considered, 86 Boxing favors the Galveston giant Jack Arthur Johnson for the victory over the Black Prince Peter Jackson via decision. This would be a great matchup of elite fighters in their primes, and almost all of the physical attributes would be even. Jack Johnson, though, was able to test himself at a higher level than the great Jackson was able to achieve, which gives him the edge in overall experience. The lights were never too big for Johnson, and he was dead set on becoming and reigning as a champion for a long time, regardless of what the world may have thought. Johnson fought a number of the great black heavyweights prior to his reign, but it would have been even greater to see such during his reign, as many were in their primes at the same time. That said, Johnson is one of the legendary boxing figures, and his reign continues to age like wine. Thanks for tuning in.